Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Thursday, November the 6th, and grateful for the opportunity that we have to spend this time together. Trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed and ready to seize the new day. We are on a new series that has begun called Rule Breaker. And if you want any information on this series, you can. We have developed a number of resources that are available on our website at bethanychurch.com. Just go up to the media page there on our website, or just click on the current sermon series, and it'll direct you to resources that we've developed. So there's videos that have been created by our pastors. There are discussion questions, and you could download them and use them as part of your study as we continue on through this particular series called Rule Breaker, which is really an introduction to the Ten Commandments. It's a way for us to begin to frame how we look at them, because after Christmas, we're going to begin a series on a number of the Ten Commandments and looking how faith and culture have been born around those commandments. And it'll be an interesting study, I think, one that is pretty relevant to the culture in which we're living in at this moment. And I trust that it'll be really insightful for you as well. So you can get all that information here at bethanychurch.com. As I said, we are in week 1 of this series, and it's called Grace Before Law. And part of this, just take you quickly, and then we'll get into something new today. But we started saying that we needed to remember the promise that God made. Way back in Genesis 12, 15, 17, God made promises to Abraham that he would give him a posterity, right? He would have many descendants. He would make him into a great nation, that he would give him land, and that they would be in a position to bless the nations of the world. And so all of this, we begin to see as God begins to call out Moses. So more than 400 years after Abraham, that promise still needs to be fulfilled. Now, God did tell them, if you look back in Genesis chapter 17, God told them that it was going to be, a period of over 400 years before they would receive the promise of this land, before they would grow into this nation. Abraham believed God, but he didn't see all of those promises really take hold in his lifetime. Abraham would die with 2 grandsons, Jacob and Esau, and they would be teenagers at that. He would never see him grow into this great nation. It was a promise that was made, but it was also a promise that was remembered, because in Exodus chapter 3, we realize that God is calling Moses to deliver his people out of the slavery that God had already prophesied about in these early chapters in Genesis. God raises up Moses, and he tells Moses, you are going to lead my people out of Egypt, and you will know that I'm the one who has spoken to you when you are standing before me with this people on this very mountain. And so this is where we find ourselves, that God had remembered that promise, because he did, call Moses, and that promise is kept. So we come to the Exodus chapter 19, and here is a chapter that begins by telling us all about what God has done, right? It's about really it's about this Redeemer that God has brought before them, so that when you look at Exodus 19 in verse 1, it says, in the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day they came to the desert of Sinai. And after they set out from Rephidim, They entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. See, this was fulfilling that word that God gave to Moses all the way back in Exodus chapter 3, when he says, I will be with you, and you will worship me on this mountain. And here they stand as a nation liberated from Egypt, what was considered to be something impossible, but God did. And so after all these dramatic events, the plagues, the Red Sea, this wilderness journey, God now is about to speak again through Moses to his people. And what does he want them to do? He wants them to remember the Redeemer. He says in verse 3 of Exodus 19, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain and said, this is what you ought to say to the house of Jacob, what you ought to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. What a beautiful expression, right? Carried you on eagle's wings. So here they are now in the front of this mountain, and God is about to speak to them personally. Throughout this time, God has been using Moses as the spokesperson. But notice what it says in verse 9 of Exodus 19. It says, the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. Moses told the Lord what the people had said. And so the Lord says to Moses, go down to the people, verse 10, and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes. Be ready on the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain. Tell them, be careful not to go up the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. So God is setting parameters here, right? It sounds kind of strange, like God's going to come down and talk, but God is holy. And the people, we're sinners. God is about to reveal his glory before them. You know what this reminds me of? And I'm sure it probably has come to your mind. This idea of putting limits around this mountain, telling him not to touch it, not to set a foot on it, declaring it to be sacred ground. Doesn't that remind you of Exodus chapter 3, verse 5, when Moses sees that burning bush and he walks over to take a closer look, and then God speaks to him from that bush and says, do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. God is just reestablishing that this ground that they are standing on is about to reveal his glory, and they can't stand in that presence. And so they're being told through Moses, basically, to consecrate yourself now, because God himself is going to come down and reveal his glory. He is going to speak to them. Now, all of this is the prelude to the big event, right? What's the big event? God speaking to Israel the 10 commandments. This is going to be the covenant that is really going to be a summary of all of the laws that God will eventually give to Israel. And this is how they are to conduct themselves in the land in which they are going. That God is going to be telling them on numerous occasions that I'm giving you all of this so that you may thrive in this land. And so it comes today, right? We talked about remembering your part. See, it wasn't just about remembering the Redeemer. It was also that they would remember to do their part. And that was also part of what they were about to learn. Notice what he says in 5 and 6 of 19. If you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So just just reflect a little bit on these two verses. They are about to embark on a journey into something brand new. All they knew was slavery. And what is the way out of this mode of thinking? I want you to think about that for a second. How are they to get out of this trauma from the past? How are they to leave behind them the ways in which they had coped with life in Egypt? It's a hard thing, right? To live your whole life one way, and now God's saying, listen, all those parameters that defined your daily existence, they I have liberated you from this bondage. You're no longer going to be slaves in this promised land. I'm going to give you this land, and you will apportion it amongst yourselves. And so people will have something that they own. It would be a way of starting over. But if all the life that you knew was slavery, now God is about to give them instruction on how they are to move forward. See how important the Ten Commandments are going to be? Because it's going to define for them who they are as a people. It's going to give them a commonality that draws them together in sense not only of their identity, but also a purpose. So how do you leave the past behind you? Well, we know how the world does it. Very often we find ways to escape, the pain, right? We kind of numb the pain. We find ways to avoid it. We seek ways to try to manage it, but never really dealing with it. Never really finding this great path forward. And they had not been this way. They had not been this way before. So I want you to consider this, that they are going in to this new land, and God is about to give them instruction. So all of this is a prelude to that, to get their attention, to making them recognize that the promise that God made to their forefathers centuries ago is about to be fulfilled. That God himself is disclosing his glory to them as the one who brought them on eagle's wings to this very place. He is the one who is responsible for their emancipation, for this exodus. But they're about to find out that they are also going to have to do their part. So what is God really reinforcing? What will follow, as I said, is the giving of the Ten Commandments. And so why the dramatic prelude? What is God trying to communicate to them? Is there something deeper for the Israelites to really contend with? And I believe that there is. I believe that this whole chapter 19 was setting that up. And that's why when you look here, I want you to consider this passage right here. I want you to keep looking at this passage here in Exodus. In Exodus chapter 19, and I want you to think about what God is doing here is establishing relationship before he gives them the rules. That's an important concept here, because I want you to realize that their relationship together, that's what's going to be at the heart of this covenant that God's going to give. That's what's going to be at the heart of the Ten Commandments. It's not that they need the Ten Commandments to be brought into a relationship with God, right? Like you got to earn your way. No. The relationship came before the giving of the rules. So the Ten Commandments, these words, they're meant to cause them to thrive. But it's all based on this relationship where God has already, he made a promise to them. He kept that promise. And he showed himself to be their redeemer, carrying them, as he said, on eagle's wings. And while now they are going to stand in possession to hear his word and then begin to do their part, before any of that happens, I just want you to realize that this is all about establishing a relationship with his people. God begins with identity and relationship, because our relationship with God isn't to be just about the checking off of boxes, right? It. How often do we think in our heads, well, you know, I need to pray more. I need to give more. I need to serve more. Like we have these things in our head, and we think that if I cross these boxes off, then somehow or another that I'm going to be in good standing with God, as if um, it's just those things that we do that are going to influence them, and we pay little attention to the condition of a person's heart, right? Our disposition towards God. Look at the Pharisees, because that would be a great example for us. You look in the New Testament, and here are people who had all the law, and they were very keen on establishing their traditions to undergird the law, right? So God would say to them, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And look what they do to the Sabbath. You can't, they prescribed how far you could walk without it being considered work. They began to make other people do chores for them so that they didn't have to do anything on that day. But if you remember, you're going to find in the Ten Commandments that part of keeping the Sabbath was that everyone would find rest. Not only the people of Israel, but anyone that was associated with their families. Even the animals were required to rest. So somehow or another, they've turned that rule so that whatever people they have working for them, they could do all that work, but they wouldn't do it. That you had to wash your hands ceremonially before you did anything on a Sabbath. You see, there's all these rules that come up with it, and they're walking away thinking, well, look, I kept the Sabbath, and they can check all the boxes. But the giving of the Sabbath was so that it would realign ourselves with God. It was a day that we would reflect upon God's revelation to us, recognizing this great inheritance that we have in him. It wasn't just a matter of checking a box saying I didn't do any work on that day. And so it is with all of these commandments. You begin to recognize that God is calling us into a relationship with himself and with others. So before the commandments are even given, God is laying down this point of clarity, because we're free from religion, from its tenets that are designed to control. We have been set free to discover something of God's character. And the challenge then is, am I living as if obedience earns grace, or am I living my Christian life in response to grace? I'll say that again. Are we living as if obedience earns grace, or as a response to it? Our obedience should flow from gratitude, not from guilt. The people have just been delivered from this oppressive state to which they have been suffering for hundreds of years now. God brings them out without an army. He instigates all of the circumstances that resulted in them being set free. God is bringing them into a land that he has prepared, and that now he is about to transfer ownership to them if they just follow in his way. And now he's gathering them together and just telling them, okay, this is how we're going to continue. but they ought to be already at a state of being absolutely filled with gratitude, with thankfulness, because God has positively impacted their life, and not just for them, but for their future, their children and their children's children. And so God has brought them out, and now their hearts ought to be tender to the things of God, so that now this relationship can go even in a deeper level. And God is saying, this is some of the parameters by which we can continue. I wonder sometimes if there have been moments in your life when there was this Exodus moment, that God has delivered you from something. And as a result of that delivery, how it changed your life, how it gave you a new perspective, how you came to recognize that God, in his mercy and his compassion, has met me in this moment. For me, actually, it was the way God had revealed that that I was chasing things that were never going to satisfy. That a life that I was beginning to live, it came so far short of what I was reading in the scriptures that God had for me. And it was almost like he caused me to grow up. And I have been forever grateful for that. I have seen how his truth has set me free on so many different levels. Last night, I had the opportunity to go to one of the sessions for our grief share. It's a group that meets to just bring a sense of compassion and hope to those who have lost loved ones. And in that circle, there were those who lost spouses after many years of being married, and they're just feeling a little lost. In that meeting, there was a young person, a young woman who has been widowed, and she has two young children, 11, 13. There was in that group a father who was pretty, from his account, a very busy guy traveling, and yet he had four daughters, and they were, in junior high, and one in college. Four daughters that now he had to be present. Everybody had a story behind their faces, and it was that Exodus moment that God brought them out. And God is continually to bring them out. But that's why he's saying, this moment is tantamount to Jesus saying to you and me, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He says, "Take my yoke upon you, learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He says, I put on this yoke. He says, you will find rest for your souls. So the putting on of this yoke, learning of what God's ways, what they mean for me, how I could begin to put this in practice. It's a yoke that's going to help me, because on the other side is Jesus himself. He's in this yoke with me, and we're going to be able to carry the burdens. We're going to be able to find our way through together. But I have to come to him, and I have to willingly put on this yoke. And he's saying it's not heavy, but it is the way for restoration. It's the way to find life. I shared a story, at the beginning of my sermon this past week. It was during the recent Palisades fire in Malibu. There was a woman by the name of Patty Phillips, and she was trying to evacuate when her car, it got stuck on a boulder. And with the flames closing in, she called 911, terrified that she wouldn't make it out alive. Well, a firefighter reached her just in time, pulled her and her dog to safety and drove them away from danger. That rescue was not something she earned. She didn't have to prove herself or pay for it. It was a gift. It was an act of grace. But after being saved, her response was that of being grateful, thankful, unable to contain her joy from others. And you know what was sweet about this whole story, too? Later, she learned something remarkable, that the firefighter who pulled her to safety, risking his own life to save hers, was trained by one of Patty's relatives. The skills that saved her life had been passed down through someone who invested in that next generation, so that the rescue wasn't going to be just a one-time event. That rescue was part of a chain of preparation that will keep saving lives today. And as we saw this week, right, like Patty, Israel was trapped in Egypt with no way out. They couldn't send themselves. And what does God do? God intervenes. He sends Moses to lead them through the sea to freedom. And now God is about to set them up so that they would then thrive in the new world to which he is inviting them. And they, in turn, would be rescuers for every generation that would come after them. God is establishing a mutual covenant with Israel. And that covenant will be known as the Ten Commandments around the world. So this whole idea of relationship before rules, just like the rescue in our opening story, Patty didn't earn the rescue. And that firefighter's training prepared him, and he proved faithful to his calling. So God is rescuing Israel from slavery through Moses, a rescue that is pure grace. They didn't earn it, nor did they deserve it. But after saving them, God is about to give them his law and just says, listen, walk in my ways. And why? Because the journey ahead would require them to trust and obey God's instruction. God's direction will provide wisdom on how to thrive in the new world. It was to be passed down to ensure that those who followed him would also thrive. And so there's this important lesson here to understand that we will never earn our salvation. This is always about this connection to God, this relationship we have with him, being passed from generation to generation. And it was the way out of the fiery furnace we too often experience in this world. So, my friends, if there is ever a text that just demonstrates this, and I want to close by referring to it with you, it's found in Ephesians chapter 2. And let me end with this. It says, it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. It is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. You see, it's always going to be relationship before rules. But obedience is the grateful response to the gift that has already been given. It is by grace that we have been saved, so that no one can boast. My friends, that's enough, I think, to go out and seize this new day. And I trust that it would cause you to always remember that God is good all the time. Thank you for joining me this morning. And I pray that God would give us another opportunity, and we'll close our week tomorrow. So God bless you, my friends. Looking forward to it.